Were you one of the lucky ones who got a couple of days off work due to the rare red alert for the UK heatwave recently? Or perhaps your biggest worry for the day was wearing enough sun cream down at the beach? The reality is, though, the more extreme weather conditions we are seeing are related to climate change. Our world is warming up, our weather is getting more unpredictable, and as we have seen in June, our hottest days are getting hotter than ever, and scientists predict this is going to continue. For most people, the extreme temperatures we have seen are just an inconvenience. Most of what we hear about from the risks relate to public health, so the health of all of us. The heat can have a particularly devastating impact on the vulnerable, so the children or elderly people, for example, or people with health conditions. And that's why we have seen some schools and businesses close during the red alert area in the last couple of weeks. That's to protect the safety of people, particularly because in the UK, we don't tend to have air conditioning. So houses, schools, workplaces were reaching really, really high temperatures where there was question marks around whether it was safe to be there. As a criminologist who is interested in real world harms that affect all of us, here is why I think we should be asking questions around crime, harm, and climate change. And not just because of the dangers of fake sunscreen. And yes, that is a thing, but fake products are for another video. Like many of you, I'm sure, I had a few really bad nights of sleep, sweltering days, and I'm pretty sure my electricity bill has skyrocketed as my single fan was on full stop. Me and the dog were just next to the fan. But did you know though, as well as making us a bit irritable and grumpy, the heat actually has an impact on crime rates. And there's some growing evidence to show that there's a relationship between violence and hot days and hot weather. And research from all around the world is showing this pattern too. To put this into numbers, one study estimated that climate change in the US can mean an extra 22,000 murders. And this is from a study by Mahendran et al. In 2021. So this means that if we continue to see record hot days and more heat waves, there could actually be an increase in violent crime rates. Violent crime includes things like homicide, assault, and domestic violence. Now, some people might explain this with biology or psychology type explanations. Heat causes a physical response that increases tendency to be violent. Others might explain it by something like routine activities theory. And what this means is people are more likely to be outside, they might have their doors and windows open, they might be more likely to be drinking alcohol in public spaces. So conditions that might increase chances of somebody being involved in a violent altercation. But others, including me, are a little bit more skeptical of some of these more causal explanations. And to be honest, it's not really the violent crime rate part I'm particularly interested in as a criminologist. Because for me, thinking beyond this idea of crime and thinking about some of the real world harms that relate to climate change, we can see how there's many direct impacts on human health and survival, which open up much bigger questions for us to be looking into as criminologists. Professor Rob White, who's one of the leading criminologists working on topics like climate change and green criminology, has more broadly argued that climate change is having this profound impact on the planet. And it's something we should be paying really close attention to. And whilst not everything which is causing climate change might be defined as a crime, if we think about what criminology is, so studying things like victims and inequalities and justice and safety and security and harm, as well as questions like what is crime, how is crime defined, when does something become defined as a crime, who commits crime, how should we respond to people who commit crimes and harm against others. All of a sudden, we can see how climate change is a central topic for criminology. And just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's not harmful. And that's the bit what interests me in particular. Let's stop thinking about crime then in a narrow way as something which is defined by a criminal legal system or the criminal law, and think more broadly about harm. And this is when we can think about some of the different impacts of climate change from a criminology point of view. So physical harm, so climate change is creating more extreme weather patterns, whether that's the heat we've just seen here in the UK and also parts of Europe, flooding, storms, wildfires, droughts, or rising sea levels. These all have a risk of injury, illness, displacement of people, displacement of animals. Ultimately, they can cause death. And with these also comes financial harm. So we might see crops being ruined, damaged infrastructure, damaged homes, impact on local economies. Let's imagine a small rural community who are reliant on a river passing through their village. It's how they survive, it's how they get water, it's how they water their crops, it's how they give water to their animals. But they now experience regular drought, and the riverbed is just a tiny little trickle now, and it used to be a big flowing river. And so now, as a result, livelihoods have been lost, families are starving, and those who can afford to move away, they've gone. They upped and left a while ago as soon as they could when they realised there was nothing left for them there. So this has had a huge financial and physical impact, but there's also a social and cultural impact too. Think about families being separated, communities being separated, the local schools no longer sustainable with such a small number of children. So kids have to travel a long distance for education, if at all. Fishing, other traditional industries, just all gone because it's no longer sustained by the river which we're reliant on. This also leads us to think about increasing social inequalities. And research evidence points out that certain groups are more likely to be impacted by climate change than other groups. Climate change might actually make existing inequalities even worse. So if we think back to the physical and the financial harms, the people who are most at risk of things like rising sea levels, floods, will also be the ones who are least likely to be able to protect themselves from the impact of these things. And we often see silly comments online like, why don't they just move? And we need to remember that not everybody has the resources to be able to just move. Moving costs money. You can't always just pick up and move an entire family unless you've got the resources to be able to do so. There's also other impacts too. Rising sea levels, unbearable temperatures that can contribute to climate migration and displacement. And these people can be more vulnerable to criminal exploitation and trafficking. Think back to rural families who have lost the river due to drought. They've had to move to a slum area on the edge of a closer city. They now live in a makeshift shelter. The area is rife with criminal groups who prey on vulnerable women and children with promises of better life or a job. But the reality is just criminal exploitation. There are of course dramatic examples, but this is a real concern, and these examples are based on real concerns. And there's many ways in which climate change might impact on victims, inequalities, communities, justice and harm. And sometimes, for the majority of us, it might feel like just an inconvenience, but other times it can have this really serious and detrimental impact. The important thing is that when we think about scale, these harms are huge. They impact on entire populations. But not just now. This impact will be felt in future generations too. So our current generation's children and their children and going forward. I've mentioned inequalities, but the other thing we need to think about in relation to inequalities is about power and resources. We're living in a world where the rich are getting richer. Elon Musk has recently been named as the first ever trillionaire. The rich are not the people who are most at risk of climate change, but they're probably guilty of being some of the biggest contributors to it. That's a video for another time, but let's circle back to this question around power. In critical criminology and in semiology, the study of social harm, we question the role of power in our political, our legal and our economic systems. These are the things that structure and shape our everyday lives, even when we might not really be aware of how. And here's a good example I want you to think about in relation to climate change. So if somebody commits an act or a series of acts that might be legal but have ongoing and significant negative impacts on the climate and environment, which then has significant and devastating impacts on a large scale with huge numbers of victims, why don't we consider this as a crime? And these are the kind of questions that Professor Rob White also asks in his book, Climate Change Criminology. Prof. White argues that those who are responsible for climate change are the powerful, and talks about this in terms of state crime and corporate crime. Global capitalism and the global companies we see that dominate our world, they operate across borders. They involve huge investment and huge use of resources. And the focus is always on economics, on the money. How can I make the most money using the least resources? White argues that it's this profit-driven motive keeping the CEOs and the shareholders happy, which means that all of the social and environmental costs are overlooked or dismissed or downplayed. And in this political and economic context, where everything has the potential to be packaged up and sold, we can see how natural resources become part of these systems. In the UK, this is very clear with the privatisation of water, a resource that every human and ecosystem needs access for, for basic survival. This is something which is owned and sold by private companies. Carbon emissions have received lots of attention, and we all know they contribute to global warming. But current concern is sitting with AI data centres and the huge amount of water they need to run. And there are real concerns about the impact of this on water shortages in the future. Yet once again, the most powerful voices are the people who are benefiting from the profits of these industries. The economic benefits are prioritised over the damage and impact on the environment. We could say that part of the problem is that these issues are mostly seen as economic or environmental issues rather than criminal issues. Professor White argues that we should use the term ecocide to describe how we can criminalise human activities that destroy the health and well-being of ecosystems and their species. And within species, we're also talking about people. This would mean we could hold people criminally responsible for their actions. But we live in a world where politicians and governments are hustled up with big tech and CEOs of powerful multinational companies. And we focus on the financial benefits that these industries bring and the convenience they might bring for all of us. There's not really much political or even public will to criminalise things because the impact might be felt in different ways by all of us. And are the majority of people who aren't really day-to-day negatively impacted by climate change willing to have more inconvenience for the overall health of our planet? So my question then is, should we put the people at the top in front of a criminal court judge when they're committing acts which are contributing towards climate change? Or do we continue to let them be protected by money and power? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this, so let me know in the comments. And yeah, I'm going to do some more videos exploring some of these topics going forward. So thank you very much for listening. And if you like the video, please hit like and subscribe.